Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Resilience Chair and Chair Assisted Yoga Teacher Training. It's being offered both virtually and face to face, and also in a bit of a hybrid format. It's a 20-hour training. The virtual is asynchronous, so you can, simply do it at your own convenience. You have 1 year to complete the training, and after that, you actually are welcome to continue longer as long as you contact me, and there's no reason why, we can't accommodate that. Okay, but hopefully you'll do it a lot quicker than that, because I hope that with this training, there will be, in essence, an army of people to kind of reach out to people who really don't think that yoga is for them, right? Don't think that they are physically able to do yoga. And also reaching out to people that think that chair yoga isn't for them. So, there's people who are physically unable to do mat yoga. Chair yoga certainly serves that purpose, serves that group of participants, and has tremendous benefits to offer to them. But maybe a forgotten part of the value of chair yoga is for people who are physically able, but maybe just need to dial down a bit. We have a lot of overachievers in our society. We are kind of an all or nothing, work hard sort of culture. And a lot of people struggle with too much, right? Including athletes. So that's another group. If we have individuals that are overtrained, for example, I think chair yoga has a lot to offer them. So I hope that you will proceed through the training in, a rate and a kind of a timely manner that is a balance between, progressing slowly enough to really be able to absorb and incorporate the content and make use of the Facebook closed group page that we have to communicate with me and with other members of the group, posing questions, bouncing ideas off one another, brainstorming, and that sort of thing. But also proceeding, quickly enough so that, we can get out there and serve people. So welcome aboard. You should all have access to the manual, and this could be in a hard copy format. Also, there's a PDF format, right? So if you're doing the virtual training, you will certainly have access to the PDF. If you would like the hard copy format printed version, I'm certainly happy to mail that out to you as well. So welcome aboard, everyone, and I'm going to upload onto our closed group a series of videos, and there will be a lot of, kind of news and commentary, things that are relevant that I will post, and I invite you to make use of that page for those purposes as well. If you stumble across some interesting articles that are relevant, maybe science that supports the value of chair yoga, maybe some cautionary notes, some contraindications that you stumble across, that sort of thing, then please do share, right? We really hope to educate all of us as a community. So welcome aboard, and I'm going to start, I think, by really telling you why it is that I have such an interest in chair yoga. I had entered my yoga teacher training, and it was right about the same time that my parents had just been in a motorcycle accident. They were in their 60s, very young at heart, energetic, fun-loving people, despite their somewhat advanced age. I mean, early 60s is not that advanced, but you know what I mean. Still riding a motorcycle. Mom didn't ride, or didn't drive, rather, she rode with Dad, so they had the single bike. And, things happen, unfortunately. And they did have an accident. Dad was driving, so he knew what was coming, and he managed to escape any harm. But Mom, of course, had no clue on the back, and she went flying. She broke her jaw, her cheekbone, and her collarbone. She ended up in the hospital, and they patched her up, and it took time for things to heal. At an age of early 60s, you don't really grow bone particularly rapidly, and it took a while for those specific injuries to heal. What was interesting, though, is Mom had always been a very vibrant, active person who walked a lot and gardened, really kept physically busy, and was very fit and trim. And it surprised many of us, me certainly, that she didn't bounce back from the accident. It really knocked her for a loop. She had had a pre-existing problem with her back. She actually has an extra vertebrae. As someone who's 4'11", I say that she actually stole one from me. She's got a long torso. I take after my father's side of the family. But anyway, I don't know if it's that particular structural element, but for whatever reason, she had had pretty severe low back pain previously. But it had been good. It kind of was one of those things that flared up and then kind of settled down and flared up again. But of course, the motorcycle accident really aggravated it. So she had the acute injuries directly related to the motorcycle accident, but she also then, had the flare up again of her back issue that was very severe this time. And really, she just ached everywhere, and the healing took a lot of energy out of her. She really slowed down, right, and was not feeling well at all. Gave up the walking, couldn't do the gardening. She couldn't do her own house cleaning and cooking and so forth. My dad was super through the whole thing. And it really took a long time for her to get back. And like I said, right about that time was when I entered my 200-hour yoga teacher training. And so, not surprisingly, I'm sure, I got very keenly interested in finding ways to help her kind of, navigate the recovery process and maybe speed it along. And I became really interested in chair yoga. And of course, it was a 200-hour training, so that's not typically something that a lot of schools spend a lot of time on in a 200-hour training. We did get some chair yoga training, and I had already expressed my interest, so they knew I was very acutely interested in it. Paid particular attention and absorbed as much as I could. And it was great stuff. It was a great foundation. And I think even more importantly, where I went was Infinite Light Yoga in Syracuse, New York, and working under Tony Raposo. I had, in my experience as a practitioner of yoga, kind of stumbled across Kripalu, a Kripalu certified teacher. And that was most of my yoga as a participant in group classes. And that was definitely a style of yoga that really resonated with me as a yogi coming to yoga at middle age. Because it really teaches gentle self-compassion, right? And as someone who is now 51, right, now officially in my 50s, turning 50 didn't bother me at all, but I have to say being in my 50s feels a little odd, just because I feel like I'm 16, dress like I'm 16, and often act like I'm 16. But anyway, as an advanced yogi, I really appreciated the philosophy that underlay the Kripalu lineage. And so when I decided to go for teacher training, I was very interested in seeking out Kripalu training. And at that time, unfortunately, Kripalu was still only offering the month-long residential programs, which sounds fabulous. I'm absolutely sure it is. I have no doubt that they, it's quite an experience and they train you well in that format. But as someone who's a mom at the time with two teenagers at home, one of them is off on his own now, but at that time I had two kids at home and a husband and a job and all that typical stuff. I couldn't go leave for a month, and so I sought out other avenues, and I stumbled across Infinite Light, which was really the best other option because their training was a weekend format. It was every other weekend for 6 months, well beyond the 200-hour minimum training that Yoga Alliance requires for accreditation. And more importantly, it was, led and taught by Tony Raposo, who had done all of his training at Kripalu. And so it's in the Kripalu lineage. I consider myself certified in the Infinite Light Kripalu lineage, right? Because it has that foundation. And so, it had included within it as a fundamental concept the gentle self-compassion. Right. In addition, it strongly emphasizes marrying movement with the breath, and modifying postures whenever necessary. It firmly does not believe in forcing the individual into the pose, but adapting the pose to fit all the many different individuals, different body types and shapes and proportions and flexibilities and strengths and so forth. And so, even though the 200-hour training didn't spend a lot of time directly teaching us chair yoga, the other foundational principles underlying the infinite light training taught by Tony really was the perfect foundation for someone really interested in learning and teaching chair yoga and working with people who, are a little beat up by life, maybe a motorcycle accident, or maybe just, aging or weight or kind of chronic diseases or whatever it is that kind of limits some individual's ability to participate in a typical group mat class. In my opinion, yoga is so incredible and has so many things to offer everyone. And so any way we can make it accessible to more and more people, I think is a phenomenal thing, right? To help those individuals, and I think by doing so, help our broader society. It strikes me that people are often a bit curt, maybe a little angry or frustrated or impatient, oftentimes because they just don't feel well, right? And so if we can reach out to people and help them to feel better, I think we all end up better as a society. So anyway, there's the story of how I got interested in teaching chair yoga. I did start to work with Mom, and I really kind of accidentally stumbled on what I think is a really great approach to it. I won't claim any great insights. It was my mom, and partly that might have played a role. If it was someone else, maybe I wouldn't have stumbled across this idea, but it really was a partnership, right? I mean, I was the teacher, certified in yoga, but it was my mother. So she's Mom, right? And so we really worked as a partnership, and I would encourage her with all those foundational principles that I learned, from Infinite Light, extending through to the Kripalu lineage, that marrying the movement with the breath, staying very mindful during movements, so that you're really sensing sensations within the physical body and moving slowly enough that she could back out if anything didn't feel right. Her back was really precarious, really tender, and if she moved the wrong way, it would send a pretty harsh jolt of pain. And so, the situation just demanded really that sort of approach. Marrying movement with the breath, of course, I think is also really valuable because the exhale relaxes muscles, releases muscles, and softens them. And so it's important, whether it's mat yoga or chair yoga, to, kind of move into the intensity of the posture, into the stretch on the exhale when the muscles are released and more receptive to being stretched. And I think, marrying movement with the breath is also important because it slows us down, right? We are a fast-paced American society, on the run, go, go, go. We like a lot of other fitness classes that are, high intensity and really fast. I teach bar and I teach spinning, and I love the intensity of those too. But when it comes to yoga, I like my intensity to stay in spinning and bar, and I like my yoga to be, a time to dial it down. And I think the breath is what gets us there, right? It's a tough sell initially, but the breath helps. So that's the underlying philosophy, and I started working with Mom in that partnership, really developing a two-way dialogue, working one-on-one, constant observation and immediate feedback if anything didn't look right, and immediate feedback from her to me so that we could back out and modify, or she would just simply tell me, I can't lift my arm higher than this, it's getting uncomfortable, and so forth. And the partnership, in my mind, whether it's one-on-one yoga or working in a group class setting in chair yoga, is the key, right? So it's important to, when you have a group of new chair participants, I don't even worry about, can we do this posture and this posture, and can we, can they achieve, the evil word, right? Can they achieve, some sort of range of motion and so forth. Really, when I start working with new people, it's all about learning to marry the movement with the breath, learning to turn your focus inward, to keep that very mindful approach so that you can sense any trouble before it's developed, and slow down, right? And always empower your people to own their own yoga. It's their yoga, And so if they ever feel they want to opt out of a posture or stretch or movement, it's important to let them know that. I mean, we know that, but the participants often don't, right? And so it's really, really critical to empower them to embrace that philosophy. And so with new participants, I spend most of the class or weaving throughout the class those fundamental principles, and I don't worry about a whole lot of movement. And especially because I always have them fill out a waiver and disclose any medical issues that I should be aware of. But what I've come to find is a lot of people really don't know themselves that they have some issues, and it tends to come out as they're moving, right? So as they're moving, they'll say, "Oh, I'm not going to go there. That hurts," and yet that wasn't on the form because it wasn't diagnosed by a doctor, right? And so they may have low back pain, or they might have, a problem with the rotator cuff that's never been officially diagnosed, and so they don't think to put it down on the form. Or, oh, I've just always had that ache, so it just doesn't even come to mind. And so a lot of the early sessions are really just observation, me observing them while I'm spending a lot of time teaching them something like 3-part breath, Durga Pranayama, very gentle warm-up types of movements, and I'm watching the movements and fluidity and range of motion, and I'm watching expressions on their faces, looking for that little cringe or whatever may arise. And so the early sessions are all about, empowering them with those fundamental principles, empowering them to take, ownership, so to speak, of their yoga. And we develop into some larger scale movements, more challenging postures later on, right? And that's always a challenge in a group class because you may often have some new participants, right? So once you've got a nice cadre of regulars, it's really nice because you can, you know them, they know themselves, which is, just as important, and you can kind of, tailor it to them and push them, where it's safe to do so. But with new people coming in all the time, it definitely gets challenging, right? But try to emphasize those fundamental principles. And I did that with Mom. She had done yoga before, mat yoga, before the accident, not super regularly, whenever the opportunity arose conveniently. I won't say she really sought it out, but, they snowbird, spend a chunk of the year in Florida and a chunk of the year up in New York State. And occasionally they would have a yoga instructor come into their retirement community down in Florida, and she would definitely jump right in and take part in that. So she had done some yoga, but there's a variety of lineages that emphasize different things, and there's not a right or wrong. It's just a variety of lineages that emphasize different things. And so, I, with her, spent a lot of time focusing on breathing and, kind of consciously trying to release muscles, and developing that body awareness and that mindfulness during movements, and empowering her to take ownership and say, I'm not going there. In this case, it was actually easy to get her to that last point because that back was so sensitive. She knew, and she would let me know if it was a problem. But yeah, we emphasized that stuff and kind of moved from there. And it worked. We met several times. They live about an hour and a half away from where I am, but we met several times while they were up for that summer. And, I taught her some movements that I felt were really safe for her to do on her own in between so that she could kind of keep things loosening up and strengthening up and so forth. And it got to the point where, she did heal, and she has now found a gentle mat yoga class right up near her, and she's continuing on her own. So it's been phenomenal. It worked out really, really well, and it got me really excited about the power of chair yoga. I went on for a 300-hour training down in the Philadelphia area at the Yoga Life Institute, and we learned some more chair yoga, more direct teaching in that particular technique and style. And, so kind of my repertoire of tools with regard to chair developed further. And then after that, I continued at Yoga Life, and I have started now a yoga therapy training. I finished year 2 of 3. And the yoga therapy training ties right into the chair yoga as well. It's been, it's just all kind of meshes really well together. And it really, I think, kind of gave me a lot of confidence in the sense that some of the things I had accidentally stumbled on have now been kind of validated by the yoga therapy training. So, the working in a partnership. The key thing is, if someone really has pain, chronic pain, and they're very limited in mobility, the most important things beyond those four foundational principles, the most important thing is help them find just simple, easy ways to move without pain. Because if people have been in, chronic pain, they guard, right? They tighten the muscles and grip and protect. Let's say it's a shoulder that's very immobile. Maybe they have some tearing of soft tissue, or they did, perhaps in the past. Sometimes these are old injuries. And, because of the injury and the great deal of pain they were in, they had learned kind of guarding techniques, and their muscles had tightened to protect and to intentionally limit range of motion because, if they raised their arm this high, it would hurt. And so instead, they always kept it down. And so when you're in yoga and you start, even doing something as simple as a nice, lift of the arms and taking in a breath, they're not going to do this, right, with this arm really elevated. And so, they'll try though, because, if they're Americans, we're work hard, try hard, no pain, no gain. And so, they'll thrust that arm up and be like, and they won't come back. So instead, just start really low and tell them, don't go higher than where you start to feel the pain. And as you keep those movements so small and gentle and easy, it does something really, really important. It builds for them trust, right? Trust in the teacher, which is important, of course, but trust in themselves, right? That they know when they start to feel that pain. We've already empowered them to, take ownership and, if it doesn't hurt, don't do it, okay? And yet, as you're moving, even these tiny, here, let me get a little over here so you can see it, but even in these tiny little motions, you're breaking up adhesions, you're stimulating just a small bit of increased blood flow. It's not huge, but it's more than what was there, right? And with increased blood flow, you're having increased oxygen delivery, which, provides energy and does the healing. And so, that's huge for actually helping tissue, right? But in addition, by repeatedly moving, in small and slow, gentle ways to the point where it doesn't cause pain, right? Stopping short of that threshold, it builds trust in their own mind. And so let's say the injury was 20 years ago, and that limited mobility is not due to real tissue issues other than maybe, some scarring and adhesions that had built up. And yet a lot of it is just simply contraction of muscle as a guarding mechanism. They start to build that trust, and they start to be able to release some of that chronic contraction, right? And so it's really, I constantly am preaching, less is more. And eventually when you start with very, very little, then it builds, right? It just keeps going and going and going. Start them with, I call it homework. I had one person who didn't like the term, so we called it opportunities for practice, right? Whatever works. And, start them with small movements that they feel safe doing and have them do it frequently, right? So small and frequent is a really powerful thing. After working with my mom, I accidentally stumbled across a person who, I thought really could benefit from chair yoga as well. It was a former coworker, I guess. I worked with this woman for, I think, 17 years before she retired from my place of employment. And when she retired, she had time on her hands, and she was going to go out and do things that she didn't have time to do previously, and that included coming to yoga. I was a brand new teacher when she wandered into my class. And as a brand new teacher, it scared me because she was only mid-60s, but I'm a college professor this woman was a college professor, and it's a really sedentary lifestyle, right? Or at least in the work environment itself. Maybe outside people do all sorts of things, but the work environment itself can be very sedentary. We sit and we read, we sit and we, type up reports and research, and we sit and we, make PowerPoint presentations for our classes, and we sit. And you get the picture. We sit in meetings, we sit, okay? And so, this was a woman who had sat a lot and had not been very mobile. And so, physically, she really struggled. She came to my MAT class. I called it an all levels class. And, in the kind of the Kripalu style of training, we are taught to start with a very simple expression of the pose, and then invite participants to stay there if they're comfortable, or if they wish to dial it up, they can make this modification or this change and so forth, and build upward into greater difficulty. And my friend and former colleague really struggled with even the simplest expression of the pose, which wasn't surprising. I wasn't surprised that it happened, because I knew the background and I knew her. But I think the really surprising part was not only did she struggle with the yoga, but she struggled a lot to get down on the mat and up from the mat. And it scared me as a brand new teacher. I was worried about her safety. We met after the class and we talked about, safety, ways to keep safe, and, please opt out if it's a posture that's not working. Here's a bunch of modifications that might be safer and more comfortable for you. I even encouraged her to go find a chair class, and I was not teaching it at the time, other than to my mom. And her response was interesting. She kept coming to my class, and she finally said, I just like the sense of community. I had a small group, but it was just a really friendly group, and I got it. I understood, but I really urged, please, stay safe on the mat, don't push, don't overdo, da 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 da. And then finally, I had, because of working with mom one-on-one, I had developed an interest in working with people that struggled, and especially one-on-one. I know this is a chair yoga training, not necessarily a one-on-one, private yoga kind of training or yoga therapy, but I developed an interest really in working one-on-one with people who, never thought they could do yoga, or really physically couldn't do a mat class. And so I made an offer to her. It was someone I knew, don't forget, because I wouldn't offer this to a stranger, but I said, would you be interested in working with me one-on-one? And so we set it up, and I met with her at her home twice a week, and we did chair yoga. And we started really slow and small and simple, because that's really what was needed in her case. She had very limited mobility, I guess it was this one, in the right shoulder. And we worked, at very modest, small movements. And over time, it really was pretty striking, the changes that occurred. The shoulder was the most dramatic change because it was so limited. But like I said, I think it was really mostly chronic contraction, right? Guarding from a prior injury. And so that loosened up beautifully. That was a real great success story. We also had to work on her strength, her leg strength. So, I had her, we were doing, of course, leg movements in the chair and so forth, but I had her start, stand up and sit down, and stand up and sit down in the chair. And I said, you know what? Every time you're at home and, your show ends, before the next one starts, stand up and sit down 5 times, right? So, teaching chair yoga in the class setting is really great. But, you can give little suggestions for ways that people can maybe carry this out and give them the safe ones, right? Real small, safe movements that they can do on their own and kind of continue the progress, right? And it builds confidence, right? She also had really limited arm strength, right? Remember the struggle to get down on the mat and back up from the mat. And so, we worked a lot. We worked with little weights in the chair. We worked with the straps, right? Yoga straps, pulling. We took blocks and we pushed right? And we just worked a lot of things, did a lot of things to try to build up some arm strength, including, finally, I know it doesn't fall in the realm of yoga, but I had her doing kind of wall push-ups to build strength so that she could, more easily and safely get down on the mat and get up from the mat. And you might say, well, why? She's doing chair yoga. Well, as it turns out, her chiropractor had really wanted her to do a couple of poses on the mat to help her back. She had a bad back as well. I mean, a huge proportion of our population does. And for example, he wanted her to do Cobra, right? And so, it was easy to do in his office because he had the table. So she didn't have to get down on the mat, right? But she said she wanted to work on that so that she could do that, in between her sessions with her chiropractor. And so we did, right? And the struggle to get down and the struggle to get up remained, but it got a little easier, got a little safer. I taught her things like, how to safely get down instead of kind of crashing. So, it's amazing what you see when you work with people who, really do have some physical limitations. But we kept at it. And eventually, this is a woman who's, she hadn't been diagnosed with diabetes, but her feet really looked, in my opinion, worrisome. I'm not a doctor by any means, but they just didn't have good coloration, and it concerned me. I had her rolling her feet on a tennis ball. We always did a lot of leg lifts and point and flex and ankle circles and, that sort of thing to try to, kind of get the blood flow there. And she also had, even as a colleague, ever since I knew her for those whole 15 years, she had very, very thinning hair. And over time, it looked to me like the coloration in her feet really looked noticeably improved. And it looked like the hair was starting to thicken a little. I mean, not a full, thick head of hair, but, a noticeable change. And so it was really just a wonderful thing to see. She ended up going on a cruise to Alaska, just her and a girlfriend. And when she came back, she said, I'm so glad I've had an opportunity to do the yoga because I don't think I could have done that trip without it. So that was huge, right? A great story. And it just kind of snowballed from there. While I was working with an individual, I rented an office. I didn't really feel comfortable working with her in her home. And I started to think, maybe there's other people who might benefit from that sort of approach. So I rented a tiny little office. Really, it was only for one-on-one. You couldn't fit more people in there. But it was great. And I slowly started to get more people in. And I also kind of started to tackle the other end of the spectrum, right? Remember that I think chair yoga obviously has a lot to offer people that are kind of physically limited in range of motion and strength and balance, such as maybe seniors or, people with some chronic illnesses and so forth. But I also think there's a really key role for chair yoga to play at the other end of the spectrum with kind of the overachievers. The overstressed, for example, the overtrained athletes. It's kind of a topic near and dear to my heart because I actually have anxiety, an anxiety disorder. And so, as someone who was overstressed, just learning simple breathing was huge, right? And learning body awareness and, how when you exhale, your shoulders drop away from your ears. There's so many people that walk around with their shoulders way up here and don't even know it. They've just completely lost that body awareness because we're all up in here. And so learning the breath, and the power of the breath is huge. And why chair? They could do it on the mat, for sure. But I find that a lot of the people who are kind of overachiever, high anxiety, high stress type A personalities are already doing, whatever it is, pick their poison, but, like spinning class and bar class and, going to CrossFit and running, half marathons and so forth. They're already doing the high intensity stuff. And mat yoga certainly doesn't have to be intense. But if you can actually get them to sit in a chair and appreciate dialing it down to that extent, it's, I think, eye-opening, right? That you can actually benefit from stillness, right? And from really, really gentle movements. And so I think there's value really across the entire spectrum. It's my philosophy. It doesn't have to be yours. You can take this training and the skill set that you find within it and apply it to whatever populations you think could really benefit. And so that's my introduction. And over the next week or so, I will be adding more videos to our closed group page, and so you can start watching the videos. And I'll post occasional questions for you to ponder. And for the actual certification, you're going to need to eventually develop a chair yoga sequence for 3 different populations, and I'll describe those different types of populations as we proceed further along in the course. And if you're doing the face-to-face training, you'll have to video yourself teaching one of those 3. If you're doing the entirely virtual format training, you'll have to video yourself teaching all 3 of those and post them to the page. So I don't want you to just send it to me. I want it actually to be shared. If you really feel uncomfortable with that, then we can work around that. But I think, like I said, I'm hoping that we'll build a community, right? A really supportive community where we can bounce ideas off each other and questions off each other, brainstorm, and pose information about concerns that have been brought to our attention. So I'm really hoping that you'll enjoy the training and you'll find a lot of value in it. Please feel free to email me at any point or post questions in the page. Feel free to give me feedback, right? If something is not working out well for you, this training is brand new. So I really encourage you to let me know if you come across some roadblocks or stumbling points. So again, welcome aboard, and I'm really looking forward to working with you. Thank you.